Imagine the Las Vegas Strip on a Saturday night in 2025. The neon still burns, bright fountains still leap into the desert sky, and slot machines still sing their hypnotic chorus. But if you look closer, the picture isn't so dazzling. The blackjack tables sit half empty, the hotel towers are packed with vacant rooms, and the people who once poured their savings into Sin City are tightening their wallets. For decades, Las Vegas was sold as a harmless playground, a place where Americans could forget their troubles for a weekend. But beneath the shimmer lies a different reality, one that might just have pushed the entire country toward another financial crisis. What if the collapse doesn't start on Wall Street, but right here in the desert? In this video, we'll expose how unchecked greed, hidden costs, and the slow exodus of middle-class tourists turned Las Vegas from a symbol of American resilience into a ticking economic time bomb. We'll trace the rise, the cracks, and the breaking point, showing you why the city that once promised endless fortune is now threatening to drag down an entire economy. Las Vegas was never just another American city. It was the promise of reinvention built on a desert that should have never supported millions. In the mid-20th century, it grew from mob-run casinos into a corporate empire, transforming the Strip into the ultimate escape for ordinary Americans. For decades, the formula worked. Cheap buffets, $49 hotel rooms, free parking, and endless entertainment made it a destination where a factory worker from Ohio or a schoolteacher from Texas could feel like royalty for a weekend. The city's economy thrived because it was built on accessibility, millions of middle-class visitors pumping cash into slot machines, shows, and sprawling resorts. But as the years rolled on, the model began to shift. The mafia gave way to multinational corporations, and with that change came a new kind of hunger profits demanded by shareholders quarter after quarter. Slowly, the generous perks vanished. Free meals became overpriced buffets, free parking turned into $40 valet fees, and hotels started stacking mandatory resort charges on top of already inflated rates. The image of Vegas as the people's playground faded, replaced by a gated resort culture designed for the wealthy. Still, the city remained a financial juggernaut with tourism, real estate, and casinos feeding one another in a precarious loop. The 2008 financial crash briefly shattered the illusion, exposing how fragile the system really was when credit dried up and foreclosures spread like wildfire. Yet even after recovering, Las Vegas doubled down on the same risky formula, building bigger, charging more, and squeezing visitors at every turn. That gamble worked for a while, but it left the city heavily exposed. By 2025, signs of strain are everywhere. Tourist numbers are slipping, locals are priced out of their own neighborhoods, and the Strip is showing cracks beneath the neon glow. What started as a paradise built for everyone has mutated into an unstable machine running on debt and dwindling trust. And when Vegas stumbles, the ripple effects reach far beyond Nevada, threatening the wider American economy. In the 1990s, Las Vegas entered what many believed would be its eternal golden age. Towering mega resorts like the Bellagio, Venetian, and Mandalay Bay rose from the desert floor, each one larger, brighter, and more luxurious than the last. The Strip became a neon empire of spectacle, where marble lobbies, dancing fountains, and themed attractions created the illusion that anything was possible. To the middle-class tourist, this was the ultimate American fantasy luxury that felt within reach. A factory worker from Detroit could dine under faux Venetian skies, while a schoolteacher from Kansas might find herself standing beneath an erupting volcano at the Mirage. The message was clear in Vegas. Everyone was a high roller, if only for a weekend. Behind the curtain of entertainment, however, the financial machine was just as dazzling and just as dangerous. The real estate boom of the early 2000s poured gasoline on the fire as workers building the resorts bought homes in sprawling suburbs that seemed to multiply overnight. Mortgages were easy to obtain, housing prices soared, and optimism felt limitless. Casinos, too, borrowed billions to finance expansion, convinced that the stream of tourists and gamblers would never dry up. For a while, it all worked. Gambling revenues hit record highs, Hotels booked out months in advance, and Vegas cemented itself as the crown jewel of American leisure. But every spin of the wheel carries risk, and the city was stacking its bets on two volatile industries, tourism and housing. When the financial crisis of 2008 arrived, both collapsed in unison. Overnight property values plunged, foreclosures gutted neighborhoods, and the once thriving Strip became a symbol of excess turned fragile. The golden illusion that Vegas had built over 2 decades cracked wide open, revealing just how precarious the city's foundation truly was. The crash of 2008 hit Las Vegas like a sledgehammer. Almost overnight, the city that had sold itself as recession-proof was brought to its knees. Entire neighborhoods in Clark County were gutted by foreclosures, leaving rows of abandoned homes baking in the desert sun. Families who had once believed in the dream of Vegas prosperity simply packed up and left, turning once bustling communities into ghost towns. On the Strip, the impact was just as brutal. Casinos that had borrowed billions during the boom years suddenly faced empty tables and half-filled hotel towers. Projects that were meant to redefine the skyline stalled mid-construction, their steel skeletons left as monuments to hubris. To survive, the corporations that had taken over from the mob shifted strategies. Gone were the days of freebies and generous comps. In their place came a new philosophy: squeeze every last dime from the shrinking pool of visitors. This was the birth of the modern Las Vegas fee system, and it would forever change the relationship between the city and its guests. Resort fees, once unheard of, became mandatory charges quietly tacked onto every hotel bill, often doubling the advertised price of a stay. Parking, which had always been free, a sacred tradition in Vegas, was suddenly monetized, with visitors asked to pay $20, $30, or even $40 just to leave their cars. Even basics like bottled water or Wi-Fi became opportunities for extraction. What was once marketed as the people's playground had morphed into a corporate trap designed to nickel and dime tourists at every turn. For many who returned to the Strip during these years, the magic felt different. The lights were still bright, but the experience was colder, more transactional. Vegas had survived the crash, but in doing so, it had rewritten its social contract with visitors. The illusion of generosity was gone, replaced by an era of relentless monetization, a gamble that would carry long-term consequences far beyond Nevada's borders. If the crash of 2008 exposed the fragility of Las Vegas, the pandemic of 2020 delivered a blow unlike anything in its history. For the first time in living memory, the city built on crowds, spectacle, and constant motion went silent. The Strip, normally a river of tourists and flashing lights, became an eerie ghost boulevard, its fountains shut off, casino floors empty, and neon signs blazing to no one. Lockdowns froze the very lifeblood of Vegas: travel, gambling, entertainment, and conventions. Tens of thousands of workers were furloughed or laid off overnight, from card dealers to showgirls to the armies of housekeepers who kept the mega resorts running. The unemployment rate in Las Vegas skyrocketed to some of the highest in the nation, and the city's over-reliance on tourism was laid bare for the world to see. When restrictions eased, Vegas tried to roar back, but the damage lingered. International travel, which had become an increasingly critical revenue source, was slow to return. Conventions that once filled hotels with high-spending visitors were cancelled or scaled down. To lure people back, casinos experimented with safety measures: plexiglass at blackjack tables, temperature checks at entrances, but these only underscored how fragile the old illusion had become. And behind the scenes, the debt piled higher. Resorts had borrowed heavily to survive months without income, and now they leaned even harder on hidden fees and inflated prices to make up the difference. The pandemic didn't just shut the lights off for a season, it rewired the business model of Las Vegas in ways that would ripple long after the masks came off. The Strip had proven that it could be silenced, and the memory of that silence left investors, workers, and visitors with an unsettling question. What happens to a city that depends entirely on indulgence when the world no longer feels safe enough to indulge? By the early 2020s, Las Vegas was desperate to make up for the lost years of the pandemic, and instead of rebuilding trust, the corporations doubled down on greed. Prices soared across the Strip in ways that shocked even seasoned visitors. Hotel rooms that once advertised for $99 ballooned to $300 or more after hidden resort fees, cleaning surcharges, and mandatory taxes were piled on. Parking lots that had been free for decades charged $40 a night, turning what had been a convenience into a costly burden. At restaurants, a simple burger and drink could top $50, while cocktails in nightclubs were priced like luxury goods. Even bottled water, once handed out as part of the Vegas comp culture, carried outrageous markups. The spirit of generosity that defined old Las Vegas was dead replaced by a system designed to drain wallets with every transaction. For middle-class Americans, the very backbone of Vegas tourism, this shift felt like betrayal. Families who had once driven in from California for a weekend getaway began to stay home or seek cheaper alternatives in Reno tribal casinos or even international destinations like Mexico. Social media amplified their frustration with viral posts about $20 beers, $100 valet fees, and shows that no longer delivered the magic they once promised. The city's image, carefully built over decades, began to corrode. Vegas was no longer seen as a playground for everyone, but as an overpriced trap, catering only to the wealthy and the desperate. Even loyal gamblers felt alienated as comps shrank, and loyalty programs became riddled with restrictions. Beneath the neon, the numbers told the same story. Visitor counts began to decline. Conventions looked elsewhere, and locals were squeezed out of their own city by rising rents and housing costs tied to speculative investment. By 2025, what had been marketed as a triumphant comeback was in fact a hollow resurgence propped up by unsustainable prices and shrinking goodwill. Greed had kept the lights on, but it was slowly suffocating the very customers Vegas depended on to survive. By 2025, the cracks in Las Vegas's foundation had widened into fault lines, and the consequences began to spill far beyond the Strip. Visitor numbers continued to drop as middle-class travelers abandoned the city, leaving hotels and casinos with gaping vacancies even during peak seasons. The corporations, addicted to quarterly profits, kept raising prices to compensate, which only accelerated the exodus. It was a vicious cycle. Fewer tourists meant higher costs, and higher costs drove even more tourists away. On the ground, the effects were brutal. Casino operators quietly cut jobs, shows closed earlier than expected, and once bustling restaurants struggled to fill tables. For thousands of workers, from dealers to cocktail servers, paychecks shrank or disappeared entirely, pushing local unemployment upward and hollowing out the service economy. But the damage didn't stop at tourism. The real estate market, overheated by years of speculative investment and short-term rental schemes, began to unravel. Housing prices dipped, foreclosures climbed again, and the same neighborhoods that had never fully recovered from 2008 faced another wave of abandonment. Banks and hedge funds, heavily tied to Vegas property and hospitality loans, started reporting losses, raising alarms on Wall Street. Suddenly, what had seemed like a regional downturn was flashing national warning signs. The story of Las Vegas, once a glittering oasis of wealth and indulgence, was morphing into the story of America's next financial crisis. Just as the collapse of housing markets in places like Florida and Nevada helped trigger the Great Recession, Vegas was once again playing the role of canary in the coal mine. Its struggles weren't confined to one desert city. They were a signal that the American economy, built on debt, speculation, and consumption, was more fragile than leaders wanted to admit. The neon was still glowing, but the financial dominoes were already falling one by one. Las Vegas may look like a localized crisis, but when you peel back the layers, it reveals a bigger story about the American economy itself. The city's decline is not just about casinos or overpriced cocktails. It's a warning sign of how fragile a system built on consumption, debt, and speculation really is. Consider the numbers. By mid-2025, visitor counts had dropped by nearly 10% compared to pre-pandemic highs, while average hotel rates and resort fees surged by more than 40%. That gap, fewer customers but higher costs, isn't sustainable, and it mirrors the same pressures squeezing American households everywhere. Just as Vegas locals are priced out of their own neighborhoods by rising rents and speculative investors, millions of Americans across the country are struggling with housing affordability crises. The Strip is essentially a microcosm of the national economy. It keeps demanding more from people who have less to give. Looking beyond Nevada, the parallels are striking. In San Francisco, tech optimism once drove sky-high real estate prices only to collapse under the weight of layoffs and empty office towers. In Atlantic City, casinos once promised endless prosperity before imploding and leaving the city with poverty and boarded-up streets. In Macau, China's crackdown on gambling wiped out billions overnight, proving that entire cities tied to one fragile industry can crumble without warning. Las Vegas sits at the intersection of all these cautionary tales, a city too dependent on one model, too slow to adapt, and too convinced of its own invincibility. What makes this even more dangerous is how interconnected Vegas has become with Wall Street. The mega resorts are not just entertainment hubs, they are massive financial assets loaded with debt and backed by hedge funds, banks, and global investors. When they stumble, the shockwaves ripple through credit markets and retirement funds spreading far beyond the desert. In 2008, the collapse of housing in Las Vegas was one of the sparks that ignited the Great Recession. Today, the warning lights are flashing again. If Las Vegas defaults, downsizes, or faces a wave of bankruptcies, the pain won't stop at the Nevada border. Perhaps the most haunting takeaway is what Las Vegas represents in the American imagination. It was supposed to be the escape, the dream, the promise that anyone could buy a slice of luxury. Its downfall signals more than a local economic failure. It speaks to a national reckoning. The middle class, the lifeblood of both Vegas and the broader US economy, is being squeezed out. If America's playground can no longer sustain them, then what does that say about the country's future? Las Vegas is not just a story about neon lights dimming. It is a mirror reflecting the cracks in the entire American system. And if the city falls into true collapse, the financial crisis it sparks could make 2008 look like just a rehearsal. For all its troubles, Las Vegas is not beyond repair. The city has reinvented itself before, and it can do so again, but only if it confronts the structural issues driving tourists and locals away. The first step is transparency. Tourists are not rejecting Vegas simply because it's expensive. They're angry because it feels deceptive. Eliminating hidden resort fees, rolling parking back into room rates, and offering honest pricing would restore some of the trust that corporations have burned through in recent years. A clearer, more upfront business model could make visitors feel welcome again instead of cheated. The second solution lies in diversification. Vegas has long tied its survival to gambling and entertainment, but that leaves it vulnerable to every shock from recessions to pandemics. Expanding into technology conventions and professional sports has helped, but it's not enough. The city needs to attract industries that bring year-round stability and jobs not tied to tourist dollars. Creating incentives for renewable energy projects, film production, or even medical research could lessen its dangerous dependence on the next big show or weekend crowd. A third solution involves focusing on locals, the very people who keep the city alive when tourists vanish. Affordable housing initiatives, better public transit, and local discounts for entertainment could anchor a stronger home base. If Vegas continues to price out its own residents, it risks hollowing out the workforce and cultural core that make the Strip possible in the first place. Finally, Las Vegas must reclaim its identity. The city's original magic wasn't about squeezing every penny. It was about giving ordinary people a chance to feel extraordinary. If executives can rediscover that philosophy by balancing profitability with accessibility, Vegas could once again be a destination where the middle class feels at home rather than a playground reserved for the elite. Without these changes, the city risks accelerating its downward spiral and dragging the rest of America's fragile economy along with it. Las Vegas hasn't disappeared, but it has lost something far more valuable than money, its soul. The Strip still glitters, fountains still dance, and casinos still hum, but the magic that once made this city a playground for every American has been replaced by a cold corporate hunger. What was once an escape now feels like an ambush, and the consequences are echoing far beyond Nevada's borders. The financial tremors beginning in Vegas are shaking the same foundations that keep the American economy upright, housing tourism and debt-driven growth. If those pillars crack, the collapse won't stop in the desert. It will spread. The question now isn't whether Las Vegas can keep the lights on, it's whether America can afford another illusion built on greed. Can this city reinvent itself, or will it become a cautionary tale, another Detroit of the desert abandoned by the very people who gave it life? That's the debate that matters, because Vegas has always been more than a city. It's a reflection of America itself, a mirror of its ambition, its excess, and its fragility. So what do you think? Is Las Vegas doomed to decline, or can it stage another comeback against the odds? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about the future of America's most infamous city. And if you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with friends. Vegas was built on the idea that nothing lasts forever. The only question now is what comes next.